don't think it's particularly productive to ask a patient what's the function of that thought or their thinking. It's more to, if you do an antecedent behavior consequence kind of track of a sequence of rumination, you'll see, oh, well, the trigger to it was starting to feel a bit irritable. And then I started having all these thoughts about how I'm being oversensitive and I'm overreacting. And the consequence of that is I feel down, but I don't feel irritable anymore. And if you get a few examples of that, then you can kind of conceptualize it together and go, well, I wonder whether one of the things that might be happening here is that your rumination is something about controlling anger.
Right.
Even though it makes you feel terrible. And then, if that makes sense to the patient and there's a few examples of that, then we can start thinking, okay, so the trigger is this sense of feeling irritable. Can we find an alternative behavior that you can do that helps you feel in control of anger? It doesn't have all the downside of beating yourself up about being oversensitive.
So then to begin to look at other strategies to reduce irritability, other strategies than rumination. Yeah.
Because the argument would be, then it slots neatly into the habit change because we can link it to the stimulus, in this case, starting to feel irritable, and it's naturally reinforcing to the person because it's kind of functionally equivalent to the rumination, but without the downside. So in that case, you might be teaching a combination of relaxation to deal with the physical effects of irritability, and possibly assertiveness. Because then you can actually go and deal with the situation that's causing the irritability. So in a sense that we're very flexible, that we can use the full range of cognitive behavioral techniques, but the selection on them is based on how do they fit into that model of what's going to be most effective to replace the ruminative habit with a more functional alternative.
Yes, thank you. Could you say something about the difference between productive ruminative thought and unproductive ruminative thought? This particular example might help with that, but we'd like to hear more about that piece.
Yeah. So I guess, this comes back to the idea that you can have it's normal to think about something that hasn't gone your way or that was an unexpected surprise or where you were hoping to make progress on a goal and you haven't. And of course, these are the kind of events that happen to everybody. So not getting a promotion or the end of a relationship or all sorts of things that might trigger rumination and trying to make sense of what happened and review what happened. The idea is that's normal, and sometimes it seems to be helpful and sometimes it doesn't. And what we've been looking at is what might make that distinction. And one of the key things that seems to be important there is the way that people are thinking about the situation that's happened to them and the unresolved goal. So that if you're thinking about what happened in a very concrete and specific way, so you're paying attention to the detail of the situation and how it happened and the context of the sensory and perceptual details of who it was with and where it was and what was going on and how it unfolded over time, that seems to be much more helpful, both in emotional response but also sort of active problem solving, than if you're thinking about the same situation in a much more kind of generalized and abstract way. So the classic example of that, which we see in depressive rumination, is something bad happens and the person sits there thinking, why did this happen? Or what does it mean about me? Why did this happen to me? Or why does this keep happening to me? A kind of clinical example would be one of our, I've seen this in a few clients, we've had someone who's depressed, who's a mother of younger or teenage children, where they sometimes get into disagreements or arguments with the kids. So they have a trigger to a bout of rumination might be having the kids misbehave or not being able to discipline the kids, and then that person will start thinking about why is it so difficult? Why don't they do this? Why can't I get control? Why am I such a bad mother? And that will go on and on and on. So they move away from the discrete detail of the particular interaction. What does it mean about me, and what's it going to mean? And I'll think about other situations where it's gone wrong, and other things where it's not worked. So when we're trying to, but if there's been the same situation, the person stops and thinks about how did this happen, and replays the detail of the interaction. Well, they said this, and then I said this, and then this happened. And they also think about, how can I do something about, what can I do next? They often get a much more kind of constructive sense of the situation. It stays a bit more in perspective. And that's what we see both clinically and through a number of experimental studies, that if you shift people between this kind of why questions versus these how questions, or what questions, it makes a big difference.
Okay. So the less productive rumination would be why abstract type of questions, and the more productive rumination would tend to be, what are the details of what happened and how did it happen, and those kinds of thinking would tend to lead to a more productive thinking and problem solving.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, and what happens with those why questions is they move away from the detail of the situation, and they kind of decontextualize it. So that feeds into the kind of generalizing that we see in depression, whereas the how questions tend to ground it more in the context, which helps keep it in perspective, but also generates potential options for doing something different, because it becomes about behavior. What could I do differently? Rather than, oh, there's something, this is something wrong with me or something wrong with the world.